Okay, folks, this is video 3 of your final tips. Your final tips for paper 3, which is on the 9th of June. So you should have already seen my first video on schizophrenia. Great topic. Second video about addiction. Great topic. Then moving down to relationships. You know, personally, it's not my favourite. But let's go over it anyway. There's lessons to learn, isn't there? Okay, so let's have a look. This is an old version of the booklet, by the way. I think it's from 21 or 22 or something like that. But it's got major similarities, and you should be familiar with stuff. Okay, so let's have a quick look. Let's have a quick look. Here we go. So you got the spec here, very tiny. Evolutionary explanations. Evolutionary explanations are a favourite of those exam writers, and then factors affecting attraction. I'll certainly be looking at a couple of those topics more clearly this year. And then theories of relationships. And again, they had a nice open question on theories of relationship in 2023. But that doesn't mean to say it wouldn't be an open question nowadays. Okay, I think they had ducks in 2023. Wonderful World of Duck. And then before that, in 2022, they had an open question. Something that hasn't come up for some time now, all the way back in 2018, is equity theory. So I'll be on my toes for that. Then you've got virtual relationships and social media, self-disclosure, and then you've got power social relationships. And 3 things you've got to learn here, remember. Levels of power social relationship, which seems to be missing from all exam papers, and the absorption addiction model and attachment theory. And I'll be certainly looking at that topic, okay? Let's go for it then. Some of these boxes are filled in, some are not as filled in, but I'm sure you can listen to what I'm saying and look at your booklet, which is probably more detailed and more up-to-date than this one. So, when you're talking about evolutionary explanations of partner preferences, remember it's all revolving around natural selection and adaptation and reproductive success. But what it really wants you to talk about are these type of things. Yeah, intersexual selection. Yeah, the preferred choice of females, where they prefer quality over quantity, and why that is, all based on anosogamy if you think about it. And then you've got intrasexual selection, which is a preferred mating strategy for males, where they go for quantity over quality, because that maximises their reproductive success. So remember, intra, within, they compete to get access to the female mate. The winner of the competition reproduces and gets to pass on all their kind of features. The strategy, of course, has given rise to dimorphism in humans, the obvious differences between males and females. Like in any physical competition, males typically size matters, and they tend to be bigger than females. So you've got more on your notes as well. I'm hoping that you've got written down the anosogamy part about how men have got an unlimited supply of sperms and females have got a limited number of eggs, of course, which means in theory men can go on reproducing even into their 70s and 80s. Good grief. I'm not even 50 and I'm exhausted with these kids. Good grief. And then you've got even more you can say. So if intra and intersexual selection, they're our go-to, remember, and anosogamy, because we can smuggle in some fancy terminology. If you needed any more, like for long essays, you've got male courtship strategies. I'll probably select 2 of those. I like mate guarding and size. And then the female strategies, and again I like both of these first 2, the handicap hypotheses and the sexy sons hypotheses. So you've got an abundance of AO1 you can use. Not too concerned about the topic, it was just on last year, but they have got a history of repeating questions, so I'll be on your toes, okay? Now how do we evaluate this? Well, of course we go for evidence, and you've got cross-cultural evidence here by Boos, a huge study. 37 different cultures in 31 different countries. Over 10,000 participants took part, and obviously it was translated into various different native languages. Females prefer dependable, ambitious older men with vast resources. Now, I know I've summarised that really, really abruptly, but that's enough to win the mark, isn't it? This theory implies that the theory may be valid in explaining the integral human behaviour across multiple cultures. You can see it's an older version. It's not as sharp as yours. Then you've got the external validity of these explanations could be considered to be quite low. They do not take into account same-sex relationships, or they're harder to apply to same-sex relationships, or partnerships where children are not desired and thus attributed to the individuals. I remember reading a paper once which said these conditions used to be pathologized in our not so distant past, and for a fact that homosexual relationships were once seen as an illness, bonkers, and maybe not so readily known, but women who didn't want children were once thought, well, what's the matter with them? There's nothing the matter with them. Yeah, it's just very, very misogynistic theory, I'm afraid. So it's kind of got a heterosexual bias. Let's use all the terminology we can. Given that these ideas can only be applied to a subset of the population, it's got limited population validity. Then you've got this kind of quasi-experimental research from Clark and Hatfield. Remember, they randomly go up to male and female students on a university campus and say, "Hi, I've noticed you were on campus and I found you very attractive." Then they say something daft like, "Would you go on a date with me tonight, please? Or would you come back to my apartment with me? Or would you like to go and have sex with me right now?" Ridiculous. Look at the stark differences. 75% of men agreed to sex to this. This is exactly what you'd expect from evolutionary theory of relationships. Men would agree for a quick copulation like that, in the sense of they can go for quantity over quality. Ironic. And then you've got this point, I haven't filled it in, but I'm sure you can remember, it fails to take into account changes in society over time. Women are far less reliant on men nowadays, and they often work for themselves and earn and gather their own resources. I mean, I know there's still a gender pay gap, which frustrates me, and I'm sure it frustrates you, but the less reliance on men for resources and dependable nature is required in today's society. So therefore, it maybe doesn't apply to the current world, suggested it's got a lack of temporal validity. Get terms in. Then you got a little whinge about a lot of the research is used on self-reports, and lots of things can happen with misinterpretation and demand characteristics. So it can be seen as a problem with boosted research, but it has to link back to theory. This suggests that the evolutionary theory of sexual slavery may lack scientific rigour. It's only based on self-reports. Okay, good. Now let's go down to filters. Sorry, not filters. Let's go down to factors affecting romantic relationships. And even though this is called a theory down here, filter theory, I would make sure you're aware that this is not seen as a theory of relationships. It's seen as a theory of attraction. Yeah, you can be asked about either of these, any one of these three. But again, imagine you had a choice. Yeah, discuss factors affecting romantic relationships. Which one would you do first? I mean, for me, I'll go straight down to filter theory. Straight down. Why? Really, because filter theory has got natural structure built into it, hasn't it? You have to talk about those three things collectively. Self-disclosure I like to a degree, but I think you can get a little bit lost in it, really. Now, let's have a quick look. Self-disclosure can be defined as this. When we're talking about self-disclosure, remember we're going to do it through social penetration theory, gradually revealing your inner self to somebody else, a bit like peeling back an onion. In romance, it's reciprocal exchange of information. One discloses, gives trust. The other partner will also reveal sensitive information, and this should penetrate the relationship and make it promote closeness, trust, and commitment. They're the terms we said: commitment, trust, and closeness. That's what self-disclosure promotes. Then you've got the breadth and depth of this, remember. As depth and breadth increase, so does commitment levels, like a layer of an onion. Get rid of the superficial stuff like your favourite colour and favourite animal, that nonsense. Breadth is narrow as many topics off limits at the start of the relationship. If we have too much information, it could threaten the maintenance of the relationship, but as it develops, it gets deeper and deeper and deeper and makes the recipient feel special. This seems to promote trust, commitment, and closeness. Get those terms in: trust, commitment, and closeness. And then you've got the reciprocity of this, okay? For relationships to develop, it must be reciprocal. Otherwise, it's going to be a one-way, not a no. Let's jump through that. So you can see there's natural structure to that. So it'd probably be my second choice, really. There's got to be evidence. So when you evaluate this, I don't know if you use the same study as one I've got here. Kleinker found that individuals that are perceived as more selective about who they disclose information were seen as more attractive, makes others feel valued and supported. Yeah? So that's a good, quick bit of evidence. The good thing about this one, I remember including this with my students, it's also been applied to same-sex relationships, which makes it less heterosexual bias than other theories in the area. Okay, so remember, it's Haas and Stratford. 57% of gay men, oh, what's happened here? 57% of gay men and women say honest, open self-disclosure, the best way to deepen commitment in relationships. So great, it's not got that heterosexual bias. But then we can have a whinge about this in kind of a reductionist way, but a sophisticated reductionism way. Yeah, so saying it only provides a level 2 explanation based on psychology. Yeah. There are other explanations which may be more convincing. The evolutionary explanation, that fundamental level 1 explanation, or more social factors like living close to each other, like we'll see in filter theory. That's a level 3 explanation. This implied that although the account provides a reductionist and a desirably parsimonious explanation, from real-world experience, it's incomplete and unrealistic. We don't just base relationships on psychology. Then you've got this problem of causation again. The much research suggests that self-disclosure leads to greater satisfaction. However, it could be the more satisfied you are in the relationship, the greater commitment you have, the greater self-disclosure comes. So it's this cause and effect. Yeah, problems here. Then you've got cross-cultural stuff. I don't know if we included this one. I think we did. It seems to be culturally specific, doesn't it? Yeah. Japanese and American students contrasted here. Compared to same-sex relations, suggesting it's a universal behaviour in romantic relationships across different cultures. Maybe. And then you've got, hold on, you have to take into account dispositional factors. And you need to trust me here, that term disposition is quite a useful terminology to get in here. Personality and self-disclosure. Some individuals, you can't say a theory in general like this in non-emphatic ways. Some individuals with certain types of personality end up telling everything to everyone. That's going to not make anyone feel special. Likewise, you might have a personality that's very private and intimate details with their partner might not know how to act. So you've got to think self-disclosure as a factor in relationships neglects to consider some very important dispositional factors, namely personality. We also know as well that males tend to self-disclose less than females. So maybe it makes females feel more special and then do it. Then you've got physical attractiveness. So I think this is a very important factor in romantic relationships, but it's hard to describe it in many ways. It's hard to describe and get structured knowledge without including the halo effect and the matching hypothesis. There was an 8-mark essay question on the matching hypothesis last year, but like I said, you have to revise everything here, so it's not just one or the other. So you've got a little bit about physical attraction here, and then you've got the halo effect. People who are deemed to be attractive tend to benefit from favourable perceptions from society. Yeah, attractive person seems to be more acquitted from crime, deemed more trustworthy and sociable than less attractive individuals. And unfortunately, attractive people know this. Sometimes play upon it. This is important as while physical attractiveness is typically the first thing we see in a partner, it could be argued that attractive people make their personalities more attractive just by their sheer physical appearance. And then you've got the detailed matching hypothesis. In this edition, you can see I've kind of done it for you. It's theory that people will seek partners of a similar physical attractiveness to themselves. So if you rate yourself as a 7, you will seek someone of a similar rating of 7 or 8. This means we need to have a realistic judgment of how attractive we are in the first place, and we often don't do that. And punching above your weight, going for someone who doesn't match your level of attractiveness, carries the additional risk of damage to your self-esteem. Yeah? Because you'll constantly be worrying that the partner is then going, are they going to leave me? Are they going to leave me? And that could activate sexual jealousy, which is very undesirable. Very undesirable. Hence, we do not simply select the most attractive people to form relationships. It implies our choice of partner is a compromise. Yeah, risk of rejection versus what we'll settle for. That sounds really bleak. Come on, Anne, you can do better than that. And then you've got evidence. Don't know if you use the same evidence as one we've got here, Merstein. There's also explanation to support the halo effect by Palmer and Patterson. Physically attractive individuals rated more politically knowledgeable and competent than unattractive people. This persisted even when they were told they have no political expertise. Very useful point here, yeah? However, it could be argued that a lot of research in the field tends to use subjective measurements. We know that some of the research methods often use self-reports, which can be affected and riddled with problems with social desirability bias and demand characteristics, which questions its validity, which means we must question the physical attractiveness as a true factor in romantic relationships. And this one is very reductionist. It breaks down complex behaviours to their novel parts. I'm not going to go too much on that, okay? You did see the complex matching bit that we talked about there. Some people can compensate if they're not physically attractive and they go for a physically attractive partner, maybe they've got huge amounts of wealth as well. So that compromises and compensates that lack of attractiveness. So Hatfield promoted this. It's much more complex than just based on one thing. Okay, let's jump down. Filter theory. This is one of my favourite bits to talk about because there's loads to talk about. Filter revolves around the fact that we only meet a small fraction of people living in our area. Most of these we tend to be of similar social class, education, maybe even the same ethnicity. And the third factor is psychological closeness. And I'm sure you remember, certainly my students, I'm sure others as well, got used to write more on this because you could be asked 4 marks on each filter. So make sure you got 4 marks on each filter. Using terminology like proximity, permitting, accessibility, the homogamy in relationships, why they're so similar. So make sure you can talk about the terminology, but make sure you can incorporate 4 points. Individual similar demographics, where we work or live, any religious groups or gym members, education, economic backgrounds. This gives us accessibility to these people. Could include other things like social class, level of education, ethnic group, and so on. Proximity, being close to people, permits accessibility. Doesn't require much effort to meet these people that are nearby, and that romantic attraction could brew when you see them at a place of worship, for example. Anyone who's too far away or different is discounted. That's why there are too much similarity in relationships. Call it what it is, homogamy. And then you've got the second level, similarity in attitudes. Can you do this for 4 marks? More likely to meet people with similar attitudes in the belief, e.g. you meet someone at a protest march or you meet someone at university. Your choice will be limited to these sort of people. Really important in the first stage of relationship formation, those that last than 18 months. But in early stages, they must agree on the basics. It'd be really difficult to have, massive political differences or massive social differences. It encourages further and deeper communication and therefore more disclosure. Then you've got complementarity, which basically says, as time goes on, opposites do attract. Focus here on how much the individual meets their partner's need, especially emotional ones, very important for moving past initial stages. Do they have the traits that the other one lacks? One might like to be nurtured, one likes to do the nurturing. More important for long-term couples. So in other words, in the latter stage of the relationships, something's got to give, Together they make a whole, which is quite self-reinforcing. Then you've got evaluation of this. Hopefully you've got some evidence down here as well. Some old evidence I've used here is Festinger, which is actually cited in exam mark schemes about people who live in stairwells, in apartment blocks, near more people. Therefore, supports the idea of demographics as a factor. But the top point, I've just blitzed over this, online dating seems to make some of these parts obsolete, which would mean it lacks temporal validity, doesn't it? Only aspects so, not all of it. Then you've got more evidence to support this by Taylor. Remember the social demographics of being of the same ethnicity. But maybe the other 15% also had similar demographics, we don't know. But get the details in, percentages. But it's very deterministic. It says, we have little control over potential mates outside of these kind of filters, which is not quite true, really. We promote the idea of individual responsibility in society and free will. So far, I would make sure we're looking at factors in relationships. Filter theory for me is a big one, and self-disclosure. And they asked physical attractive not so long ago, but a filter theory for me is one we need to be looking at carefully. You need to revise it all, don't forget. Then we go down to theories of relationships, and again, quite a common questions for them to ask about. I think nearly every year they've asked about theories of relationships in one way or another, be it a 1 marker, be it a 2 marker, 16 marker. The thing that tends to be missing in detail is this one on equity theory. So jump straight down. Again, mine looks slightly different to yours. The basic theory of social exchange theory is about an exchange of resources. In a relationships, individuals try to maximise their benefits and minimise their costs. This is known as a mini-max strategy. To get the terminology in, give some examples of rewards, companionship, sexual gratification, maybe financial support. Some of the costs, give some examples. Lots of independence a little bit, really. People being reliant upon you. Some people like them, I guess, don't they? And then you have to go further, remember. Individual will calculate the outcome of the relationship by using a cost-benefit analysis. And then you've got comparison level on the current relationship using past relationships with a guide. And then comparison levels for alternatives. There's loads of detail to this one, which makes me think, if you had a choice, If you had a choice, outline and evaluate one theory of relationships. Surely it'd have to be either this one, there's so much structure to it, or this one. Yeah, for me, looking at it and what we've got down here, I'd probably end up doing social exchange theory if I had a choice. And remember, this theory basically says we're all selfish beings. We're in relationships to maximise our benefits. And if my partner's not maximise their benefits, so what? Because that's not what the theory cares about. That's equity theory. Okay, so you've got more on this. You've got comparison levels. If you remember, Kieran added these as well: sampling stage, bargaining stage, commitment stage. I mean, there's so much here. If you had a 16 marker on, I don't know, one theory of relationships or two theories, I'd have to do this one. Certainly would. Then you've got your evaluation, reverse spot and some. Put on evidence first. I don't know if you've used the same evidence, but it's important you do. And you can always talk about the fantastic practical applications from this theory, but it must be specific. So you can talk about couples therapy or marriage guidance. But what this theory suggests is, in relationships, we lose focus of the give and take and are encouraged to focus on how they and their partner contribute to the relationship. So in other words, don't just think about yourself. Think about maximising the rewards for the other partner. Basically hinting in couples therapy that you should think more about equity. Yeah, but make sure you talk about some angle of this theory in couples therapy. Okay, not just generic stuff. You can't just say this theory has been used in couple therapy, isn't it good? No, it makes people consider other people's benefits and other people's costs. And then we've got this bit, which I think you'll agree with me, the early stages of a relationship. No one's looking at the costs. No one's, once you found like your soulmate or someone who you're really drawn to, no one's thinking, God, I'm always calling you and using my credit. Not really, yeah. So maybe it's more relevant to the maintenance and breakdown of relationships as opposed to the formation. Oh, why does it keep doing this? Then you got, it seems to be culturally biased, yeah. Some cultures have arranged marriages and don't really talk about this, do they? And then we've got individual differences. Some people stay in relationships when the costs outweigh the benefits, such as in domestic violence, Plus some people don't mind giving more. There are names for that, remember? Yeah, there are names for that. Benevolence. And neglects to consider the value of individuals in explaining relationships. Good. Then you've got equity theory, probably my preferred theory, yeah, if I'm being honest, because it's more realistic. There's enough here, like economic theory of relationships, which is emphasising fairness, not equality. Each partner to experience a balance between their costs and rewards. Both partners' profit is roughly the same. It's a ratio. You might not give as much, but you might not get as much back. But it's about the same. They become dissatisfied when it's unfair. Over-benefiting can lead to certain things like feelings of guilt, comfort, and shame, and under-benefiting can lead to feelings of anger, hostility, resentment, and humiliation. Specify what they are. Yeah. In other words, partners feel they put more in than receive. It's considered inequitable and could end. But there are opportunities to recognise this disparity and save the relationship. Yeah. And again, Kieran or one of the team encouraged us to have this more detail, which just again makes it irresistible for a 16-mark essay. There's profits, distributions like trade-offs and compensations, dissatisfactions and realignments. You can restore it. And we looked at this example here. Say, look, Hannah earns far more than Torin. Why would they pay equal amount? There shouldn't equity. There should be a ratio of that if they're really in a rewarding relationship. Evaluation, quick evidence, Dane turn for me. Then I've got cross-cultural support by Yum. Again, cause and effect issues. Yeah, most people in relationships don't think in terms of rewards and equity, and when they do, it's in trouble. So, in other words, when you're dissatisfied, you start thinking about the equity of the relationship. We've got this great point here by neglecting to consider dispositional factors in relationships. Huseman says some people are called benevolence or can be referred to as that. We're prepared to give more in relationships, and then you've got the opposites, benevolence, you've got entitleds who believe they deserve to benefit more. What cheek. And again, practical application, if you make it relevant to this, explain to that couples that they may put in more than some aspects, but overall it's fairer when we consider multiple aspects. That's how you'd get that in there. More stuff as well you can think about. Some people think that women tend to do more of the work in relationships to make it more equitable. So again, it neglects to consider these dispositional factors. Yeah. So again, make sure you're on your toes with equity theory, please, and social exchange theory. Only been a 2-marker on equity theory for some time now. Oh, was that right? Hold on. Yeah, it's all Rusbolt. Social exchange theory. Yeah, so look at that carefully. I love Rusbolt's model as well because the first thing I'll do is draw it. And you've got to be able to describe what is meant by satisfaction for 4 marks, really. Comparisons with alternatives, they can ask you one simple thing on that for 4 marks. And investment size, yeah, 4 marks. You can do that easily. Then you've got even more stuff to pad this out with. Easily a 16-mark essay's worth here. Problems measuring key variables, investment model scale developed, but it's still a questionnaire. Yeah, so it's still got problems with social desirability bias. Therefore, investment M&C can be accused of lacking authenticity and detailed support. Yeah, investment model of commitment. Come on, Anne. Then you got this great evidence. I love this evidence because we can specify it. I'm sure if you haven't done this evidence, you'd have done something similar with a similar study in similar details. But Lee and Agnew did a great meta-analysis of 52 studies, 11,000 participants from 5 different countries. And they found the biggest factor, of course, was satisfaction. And then negatively related was alternatives 0.48, negative 0.48, and then investment and commitment 0.46. Just remember some of those numbers. I think it's a great study to cite. But there are theoretical issues with it, of course. It neglected to consider future investments, which people do take into account. Saving for house deposits or planning on children. It doesn't take that into account. They are theoretical, really, aren't they? So say it in a nice way. These theoretical investments seem to be a strong predictor in a relationship. So it's got some limitations. Then you move down. You've also got, it has gone fantastic real-world applications, can explain all sorts of relationships, from abusive relationships, low satisfaction, and domestic relationships, which other theories cannot explain. It cannot explain. So I'd say the generalizability of this is really, really huge. We've got many countries, many types, even like friendships and abusive relationships. Really useful, really useful. So just to reiterate, you've got 4 fantastic theories there. If we go over Duck's model as well, it seems to be Duck's has been asked a fair few times recently. 2023, 8-marker on that or something, I reckon. But you have to revise it all. But when you're revising this, please make sure you don't do these bits. With Duck's model, we just want the I, D, S, G, I don't smell good. Each of these phases should be able to just go on for 4 marks. I'm not going over these in detail now, but I suggest that you do. What about that question as well? If you had to describe one of Duck's 4 stages of relationship breakdown, which one would you pick? Well, you can see through my descriptions here, they've all got 4 sentences with them. Yeah, so you have to play to your strengths. I quite like social, because I can go, people might do this, people might do that. But dyadic is very strong for me, and intrapsychic as well. It's your choice, but you need to know them all. And remember, it's supposedly a set sequence. Ways to evaluate, always evidence. And I picked this evidence ages ago because it's so simple. 92 students, that's all we needed. But it's got even better, fantastic, useful practical applications because it can offer tailor-made advice to people in different stages of relationship breakdown, and it could resurrect that relationship. Yeah. And then we've got a problem. Some people think, well, this model, it doesn't really explain things properly because the way relationships end, from someone cheating on you, from someone just being a long-distance relationship, it's going to follow a different pattern, isn't it? And it neglects to consider that. And if you remember, another one of the great points we had about this, one of the other great points we had about this, remember, is it sometimes entire stages are passed out or the order seems to break down. You'd have to explain that. In the sense of, remember, sometimes it goes straight to social before dyadic. People seek advice of family and friends before telling their partner. Maybe I don't know if that's a gender specific thing or not really. And there's other bits as well. Women neglect to consider further dispositional factors. Yeah, gender for one. Cassian has found gender is a big factor. Women tend to blame less and incompatibility for relationships, whereas men often blame lack of sex. Acker has also found the person who initiates the breakup suffers less. It neglects to consider this, doesn't it? It does. You've got 4 theories now. I would certainly make sure you're on your toes for equity and, well, all of those theories. And then you've got these virtual relationships, yeah? And you've got self-disclosure virtual relationships. Let me just double check. Again, only short question on this last year, very short question, so I'll be on my toes for this as well. Making sure you've got understand self-disclosure from two different perspectives. Yeah, reduced cues theory, you suggest self-disclosure is less. And then you've got the hyper-personal model, which suggests more self-disclosure in virtual relationships. And you can see the amount of detail I've got here, because I think it's important that you can say at least 8 chunks of information. Very important. Then you've got evidence for this, of course. Evidence. It's even more practically useful for people who have got social anxieties. And, Scruton found that, people do experience greater online self-disclosure due to the absence of non-verbal communications. And they can express their true selves. And 70% of relationships survive the test of time. Yeah. Then you've got some subtle cultural differences that you can always comment upon. And then you've got this very strong point for anything in virtual relationships. It tends to be multimodal, this idea that it's either online or offline. It doesn't really work in the 21st century anymore, does it? Because of the advent of technology. Okay, that's enough on that. Then you've got more on virtual relationships when you talk about the absence of gating. These have all been named on the spec, so they can directly ask you about this, okay? Directly. So don't just do the bit on self-disclosure and neglect to review the absence of gating, okay? In the past, they tended to throw them both together. They did. I think last time was about 2022 or something. But they could. There's no reason why they can't break it down. So make sure you go over all of these, please. Same thing. Researchers not established if age, sex differences affect these absence of gating like evolutionary theory would predict. So it's awaiting further research. And the effect of lowered gates in virtue suggests that the filter theory does not apply as much. So maybe it's helped us modify theories. Yeah. Evidence. I remember this part. Barg found that intimacy developed quicker in physical relationship because of a lack of gating, no barriers putting things off, and found that removal of gating features in virtue allowed disadvantaged people to enter relationships without anxiety. And then the cues are just different. They are not missing, they are different. That's a great point. Then on to the last part, okay? Parasocial relationships. Remember, you have to define these. Quick 2-mark definition. Don't get missed out from this. I don't think, let me just double check. Have they ever asked about levels of parasocial relationship? Not in real life papers. Yeah? Not in real life papers have they ever asked about levels of parasocial relationships. So make sure you know these, please. At least 3 marks apiece. Yeah? Then you've got this theory. And again, I like this theory, but they've only recently had this, haven't they? I think it was 2023, which means nothing. It means nothing, but I do prefer this one to the attachment theory. I think there's more to it, and it's all about this, isn't it? People form a parasocial relationship because of deficiencies in people's lives. You have to suggest what those deficiencies might be, yeah, and then this type of parasocial relationships offers a form of escapism from their normal drab lives, and then the absorption very short. Then what triggers them to go to this addiction is his personal crisis and needs a more intense involvement to sustain the relationship where it can engage in extreme behaviours like stalking or delusionary thinking. These are pathological signs, okay? So make sure you know these, but make sure you know the subtle bits like making sure you're going into detail about what these deficiencies actually are. Okay? Evidence to support the model. Yeah, there's lots of bits and bobs of evidence, but sometimes these can be functional, as Maltby suggested. Research interprets a clear relationship between poor psychological adjustment and PSR. But which comes first? Then you've got cross-cultural support, if you remember the study about Harry Potter. But then you've got Maltby's idea, looked in particular at females aged 14 to 16 who had a negative perception of their body shape. They found females had poor body image, speculated it could be a precursor to development of anorexia. I think I'm missing a bit of key evidence there. Can't see it. I'll leave that for now. Let's go down to the next theory, please. Attachment theory. And statistically, I guess it's more likely to appear. Remember this I told you about. Attachment style is something in adulthood and attachment type is from childhood. But because of the continuity hypothesis, they're one and the same. So get this terminology and come on. It's a classic example of psychic determinism. And the basics are they can be linked to attachment problems in childhood. People with childhood attachment problems form parasocial relationships to meet the need for attachment or affection they are missing. Yeah, why? Because they make no demands, they don't involve criticism or risk of rejection like you'd find in a normal day-to-day relationship. None of this is to be cited in an exam, that's background stuff. But then you've got this bit, and you might like this bit because it's got natural structure, proximity seeking, secure base, protest at disruption, and then attachment style. Okay, you can see it does have a bit of structure here, okay? So make sure, if you're going to go and describe attachment theory, imagine that sort of question as well. Outline one theory of parasocial relationships. Looking at this now, there is more natural structure to it, especially if I can get these bits in to start with, yeah? You know, this bit, parasocial relationships are based on attachment problems, and then you just get these early bits in before you get down to the natural structure down here, yeah? It'd be useful. Oh, this is the evidence I was talking about. Evidence links problems in childhood to parasocial relationships. You've got these now, 63%, 50%. No one can miss numbers, folks. But there's contradictory evidence, makes it even stronger. McCutcheon's work on attachment styles and celebrity-related attitudes in nigh on 300 participants and found actually parasocial relationships are no more common with those with insecure attachments to those with secure attachments, casting doubt on this. Yeah. Again, fails to take into account their functional. It seems to cast assertions that parasocial relationships are not very useful. It can be practically applied, emphasises the importance of caregiving then, doesn't it, in infancy, and making sure you safeguard the future relationships of your children. It'd be a stretch to get this point, but if you phrase it like I've done here, you'd win it. You'd win it. And then, last point, I'm not going to start whinging about research. Let's talk about the psychic deterministic nature of this theory. Yeah? Surely we've got room for free will and experience that we learn in life through relationships. There's so much more to relationships than those 3 or 4 years that we spend in attachments. And that is about it, okay? That's just making sure I've gone over the important parts. Factors in relationships, especially physical especially filter theory, equity, theories of relationships, pick your best ones really, but just making sure you're aware that equity theory hasn't been asked that recently, but you have to go over all of them. And then parasocial relationships, so I'd make sure you go over levels of relationships, the absorption addiction model, and that attachment model. So hopefully you found it useful. Hopefully you have, because that's my 3rd out of 4 videos. The 4th video will be released on Friday, okay, on issues and debates. Got some personal issues I need to address over the next few days. I won't be at work, okay? Hopefully that helps. Keep going, people. All your efforts count. They all count, even at that stage now.